You're listening to Kill Cliff's Hazard Ground podcast with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get to this week's guest, a former member of the 75th Ranger Regiment, multiple deployments overseas, and now owns or is a co-owner of one of his own companies on leadership. We'll get to him coming up in just a few moments. But our normal few announcements as we start off the show. And these are reminders because, well, you guys aren't doing your job. I say that kiddingly, but I say it meaningfully in that we need you guys to continue to follow some of the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hazard Ground Podcast as well. Go to our website, hazardground.com, and click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage or under the sponsors tab. Why? Because if you're an Amazon shopper and you go to hazardground.com first and you use our link, we'll get a percentage of whatever you guys spend. I know back to school is coming up. People are buying stuff for their kids. If you're going to do it on Amazon and go to hazardground.com first, we get a percentage of what you spend, and then we donate a percentage of that back to some of the great charities and organizations you've heard featured here on the show. So it's an easy way to help out veterans organizations just by doing your normal Amazon shopping. Works as well from your smartphone. This way, if you have all your credit card information saved and everything, it redirects you to the app. It's really simple and convenient. But go to hazardground.com first and click on the Amazon button. Please continue to leave us Apple reviews. I love getting them from you guys. Every time one pops up, I get an email, puts a smile on my face because you guys genuinely do love this show, and we appreciate that. But the more Apple reviews we get, the more we grow, the more people that hear this podcast and share all these amazing stories of American service members and what they are doing. And then, of course, finally, please continue to give us a shout at producer@hazardground.com. Let us know what you think about the show and guest suggestions. We take them there as well. All of that stuff continues to help us grow. So continue to send us feedback and email through our website and producer@hazardground.com. All right, let's welcome this week's guest, who spent over 24 years in the military, retired as a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, deployed 8 times in support of the global war on terror, including with the 75th Ranger Regiment and Joint Special Operations Command. And he actually finished his career with the Old Guard at Arlington National Cemetery. Don't need to tell you what that's all about. He now is currently the CEO and co-owner of a company called LDR Leadership, which specializes in performance management and leadership training. He is Dave Taylor, joining us here on the Hazard Ground podcast. Dave, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Appreciate you having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the connection between you and I came through actually Tony Main, who is Ranger for Life here, a former guest of ours. But Tony is down in the Fort Benning area, and he's a great colleague and a great friend. And the Rangers, you guys still run tight together, even all your post years. So the community.
It is, I love seeing the Ranger for Life program. It's well needed, and we're really glad to see them kicking that thing off. So I'm excited to be a part of that as well. It's good to see us taking care of each other.
No, absolutely, and again, it's a widespread net. You know, despite the fact that the Rangers are a pretty elite force, and there was a small number of you, comparatively speaking, you guys are everywhere. So it's great to see that everybody is sticking together. An amazing career, and I want to talk to you about LDR leadership because there's something very interesting about the leadership business, because it's become a business in the post-global war on terror field. And in some places, I don't want to dive too deep into this now, but in some cases, I think that there are a lot of people sort of co-opting their military experience and trying to flip it into monetary rewards in public speaking and everything else, which I don't necessarily mind. I think it's a bad thing. But I certainly think that there's a way to do this that benefits people, and there's a way to do it that has more self-interest and self-benefit than necessarily a holistic picture. So the leadership business is now, like the leadership industry is now a thing.
Yeah, it certainly is. And, I kind of fell into it by chance, once I retired and fell into it. And we look at it, I've got multiple instructors. I got about 9 instructors, and not all of them have military experience. And our program's it's not founded on a military aspect. Because at a certain point, your military experience is good. But when you get out in front of somebody, you got to bring more to the table than this is what I did in the military, which is one of the reasons I went back to school as well. So we could take, there's the art and science of leadership, right? You have the art, but then really what we wanted to focus on was what is the science and the research behind it? And how can we apply all that evidence-based leadership training and provide it to supervisors and managers across the country that need that, right? You get promoted because you're technically competent, but then we forget to fill that gap on how do you manage people, and that's just a different trait and a different tool.
Yeah, and I did neglect to mention that you do have a master's degree in leadership from Georgetown University. Hell, I have a master's in organizational leadership. So not only is it a thing, it's actually a career field these days that you can actually, take in college and everything else. But we talk about the military experience. Start back at the beginning for you and how you got in the Army.
Yeah, so I was a product of be all you can be, right?
Same here.
Growing up, I still think it's one of the greatest commercials, right? Because everybody still remembers be all you can be. Mm-hmm. And the little brochures that you'd see, these little brochures at every place you'd run around, and ever since I was a kid, if you ask my mom, I think probably when I was around 11, I was running around with my M16 BB gun in the woods, shooting maybe or maybe not shooting my house, shooting neighbors' houses. And, there was just something that always called to me. My uncle, James Randall Taylor, Jr., was killed in Vietnam. So obviously, I never met him. I wasn't a product of a military family. My grandfather was in the Air Force. It was just something that called to me. I enlisted in 91 of my high school year, enlisted in the Maryland Reserve as an MP. Little known secret that I just let out. Did not let too many people know I was a military policeman to start off with. So my parents they're like, hey, you can go in the reserves and then go to college. And then if you want to do whatever you want to do after college, go to college, which is great. So I went to West Virginia University and then transferred over to the Pennsylvania Army National Guard into the infantry and had, if you're interested, I had my typical, I'm going to be a bonehead, watch too many movie platoon type things that learn my lesson quick. And then I got commissioned. I was in my senior year in college. I was down at Gold's Gym working out, and the professor of military science saw my short haircut. I was getting ready to put an OCS packet in, and he, Colonel Doug Floor wrote me into ROTC at West Virginia University, and I got commissioned out of there in '97.
Yeah, it was be all you can be. Get an edge on life in the Army. You got an edge on life at West Virginia because what I know of WVU in Morgantown. The edge is on partying, and the rest is left to the gods to decide.
Yeah, they just get such a unfortunately, as good as the school is, they just cannot shake as much as they've tried to shake it.
No, they haven't tried to shake it. Don't lie to people. I have plenty of WVU alums, and to this day, they're all 20 years out of college, and all they talk about is, man, what a party VU was. It's great.
Well, and my son goes there now, so needless to say, football weekends are a blast in the fall now.
Yeah. Well, listen, they're relevant and they're good, but yeah, listen, there's not really much in West Virginia other than Morgantown and Wheeling. So you picked one of the two cities that actually had something to offer.
Yes, yeah, I love it. I mean, most people actually think I'm from West Virginia than Maryland. I got a Maryland tag, but I got the West Virginia alumni stuff. And when I was deployed, I always had a West Virginia flag everywhere, and that's Yeah. The flying WV train, it goes everywhere with me.
It's not hard to figure out that you went from a school that runs deep and runs tight and runs everywhere to an organization in the Ranger Regiment that runs deep and runs tight and runs everywhere. So at least you're consistent from that standpoint.
That's right. And I grew up in Annapolis, so I definitely didn't want anything to do with the Navy.
No, absolutely not. So you go to infantry IOBC back in the day. Did you know you wanted to be a Ranger from the jump when you got into the infantry?
I did. I mean, I knew from the brochures, right? Because the BLUB brochures had like Ranger, Special Forces, Green Beret, Airborne, and there was just something about being a Ranger I always wanted. I wanted it from the time I was in ROTC.
Were you the kind of guy who did a lot of research on Ranger School and how to get through it and everything else?
I probably did, but I think it's one of those, I listened to my instructors. I still think one of the best things I did was by the fact that I at least went through basic, I had a larger understanding by the time I went through ROTC. And I talked to some folks that had been through it. So, again, I don't know if it's one of those you can prepare for it other than just prepare for it to suck, right? And if you have that mindset that it's going to suck and it's, as long as you don't quit, you'll be fine. I don't know that I did anything special to train for it other than, the physical fitness aspect and trying to mentally prepare myself for what was about to come. I mean, I still blame Ranger School for the fact that I eat my food in like 5 seconds. Well, that's probably basic training and Ranger School, right? So, try being a single guy going out on the date mark, right? And you're like, the food's in front of my face, and I just want to shovel it in. I'm like, all right, take a breath, take a breath.
I never resisted that urge, and similarly to you, I have a big Italian family and basic training to thank for the fact that I still scarf down my food. And honestly, when I was single back in the day and going on a ton of dates, I always eliminated that by eating a meal before the date. So I wasn't like famished by the time that I got there. So I had one meal
that's
at home,
a good technique.
and then went out. And this way, oh yes, I'll just have an appetizer. Everything will be fine.
I might steal it from you.
You look all dainty when all you order is a salad and some little little cream puff appetizers. But anyway, so we digress from dating philosophy 101. Anyway, so when you get through IOBC, do you immediately go to Ranger School, or are you one of those people who went to your unit first and then went back?
Yeah, I went to my unit first. So
Okay.
I went to 1st Battalion, 187, 101st out in Fort Campbell.
All right.
So went right there, and then was fortunate. I think I spent the 18 or 19 months. So I got to 101st, and I think guess it'd been the end of 2007, or maybe the first part of 2007, 97. 97 or 98, and then got to 3rd Battalion in 99.
So, all right, you're in a pre 9/11 world, and you're in the Army, and you said this is something that you knew you always wanted to do. Did it live up to the billing of being all you could be prior to 9/11?
You talking the Army writ large?
No, the Army in general. Like I know you had like a bigger plan. You were heading to Ranger School, and that's something you wanted to accomplish. But from my own active duty experience, and this is one of the reasons I got off active duty, because I felt like I was oversold something. Like be all you can be. I'm like, yeah, Fort Hood sucks. I can't be anything here other than a New Yorker sticking out like a sore thumb. That's all I can be. We didn't go anywhere. We didn't do anything. I mean, yeah, we went to the field, but it's like I thought I was going to be all I can be. Right now, I'm just an angry second lieutenant. Just waiting for something exciting to happen.
Well, I think there's two aspects that I looked at. Is that my very first commander in first sergeant almost had me leave the Army. I mean, they were horrible. They were not good. They were not good. The commander didn't listen to anybody. The first sergeant spent more time washing his truck, in the back. And I was like, is this what I'm going to expect? Fortunately, the next unit, the next platoon I went to, I had a great commander, great first sergeant, kind of changed the dynamic. I was like, okay, that's what I wanted. That's the leadership I was looking for in the Army. But you're right. Like our air assaults were truck assaults. I think the entire time I was at the 101st, we did maybe one air assault. We did a truck assault. But I wasn't disappointed because I still had a goal, right? I still had a goal of getting a Ranger Regiment. I still enjoyed being an infantry officer. I was married at that time. Yeah, I still thought I was on the right path for what I was looking for. I always go back to that second commander and first sergeant. If their leadership wasn't the way it was, how would my life have, changed? Because I might have left the military after my first experience.
It's funny when you talk about your first commander. It jars my memory of my first commander on active duty. And look, full disclosure, look, I was an arrogant prick as a lieutenant. I've told this a million times on this show. If I could go back and do anything, if I have any regrets about my military career, I would have gone and been a better lieutenant. I absolutely would have. I would have embraced a lot more things. I would have been a lot more open to things. As it was, again, I was stuck in a place I didn't want to go at Fort Hood, and this wasn't something at the time I had visions on doing for 23 years like I do now. And I didn't have respect for the job that I had until after I deployed. And that said, I remember my first commander. Like I look back, I'm like, what a putz! Like it's weird because, somebody said to me, the only two cool ranks in the Army are captain and colonel, right? And that's just because of a little bit we talked before we were recording. Like the things you can put your hands on as an 06 and truly affect are pretty amazing when you think about it. But it's the same as a captain. The amount of people you can have a direct impact on as a company commander is so large, and the responsibility is so awesome, and there's nothing like it. That impression that you make on new lieutenants and new soldiers, I don't know if a lot of commanders, or at least back then, prior to the War on Terror, really grasped and really understood the relationship that they were creating from day one.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And, if I even backtrack to when I was in the reserve, I think it was in the reserves. It was the Guard Reserve at that time because I switched. I wish I knew this guy's name. He was a second lieutenant, and we were all out on the field. I was probably at PFC, and we were breaking down, we're breaking down GP mediums. I specifically remember it. And, all of the privates were breaking stuff down. All the enlisted guys were breaking stuff down. And this young second lieutenant, I say young, he was obviously older than me, but, now he looks young to me. Small guy, right? Like he wasn't a big guy or anything, but we're all folding these GP mediums up. And all the officers are kind of standing around watching. And he came over and was folding up the GP medium with us, and said, we were talking. He said something like, "Yeah, I'm no better than you guys. I'm just wearing a bar." And that kid, that guy at the time was a massive influence. And at that point, I said, if I'm ever going to be an officer, I'm going to remember that, because that impact he had. I was like, that's the kind of guy I like right there. I'll follow that officer, because he wasn't afraid to get down, and he made a huge impact on me, on at least kind of how I wanted to be, or try to emulate as best I could throughout. But I think you're right. The impact is powerful.
I want to ask you, just, in retrospect, looking back on it, having those bad leadership experiences, is that, does that go into later on in life, your decision to go to LDR and work in the leadership field? I mean, all that stuff, is it cumulative for you?
It is, right? So when we're out training with our program, and we're talking to leaders at, from the employees up to the C-suite or boards, we can use all of our experiences, and we like to use our, not only experiences that we saw that weren't good, but our own mistakes, because we all make mistakes. So we like to share them, because we can, our goal is, when we're teaching something, or we're talking about communication or emotional intelligence, high performing teams or standards, like, hey, look, here's some errors where I made. Here's errors where we've seen. Here's some good things. All that ties in, right? It transcends. It's just, how do you deliver it, and how do you make it relate to somebody so they can see it from their optic and their perspective?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we draw on so many experiences throughout our career. Sometimes we don't even realize how they impact us. But for you now, it's on to Ranger School. So you leave the 101st and you go to Ranger School.
Yeah.
This for you is, this is the top of the mountain here. All I got to do is climb this and you are at Nirvana. So what are you thinking going into this whole thing?
Yeah, it is. It's like, man, I better not screw this up, because if I screw this up, that's done, right? Like, at that point, if you're an infantry officer and you can go to Ranger School, I mean, and you didn't pass, man, you're just a chump, right? So like, all the pressure's on at that point. Like, you want to show up, at least show up with some bald wings and a Ranger tab to your unit. And man, I was scared. I was scared. I mean, it was like, head down, don't be noticed, just do your job. I mean, I remember, I lost like 21 pounds.
Yeah.
At the time, my girlfriend, though, one of the things that got me through, my girlfriend and future wife, I got a letter from her literally every day. Well,
wow.
Whenever we got mail,
right?
But everyone was numbered, right? So I could see the order and read them in order that that she sent them. But it was just, I mean, that was like the first, like, okay, here you go, you're now in it, and God, just don't screw it up, right? Yeah. And I was true blue through like winter phase or Florida, and man, right. And it just, I mean, then just shit went haywire. And I did have one of those key moments in Ranger School where
this was my next question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the next one, like your first big leadership or your first big lesson, your first big mistake that you learned from in Ranger School was what?
Yeah, so the thing I remember most, right? We were in Dahlonega, and it was cold as hell in October. And maybe October it's not cold normally, but when you haven't eaten and you're got no food and snivel gear.
And you're also about, 600, 700 feet above sea level, wherever it is in Dahlonega.
Yeah, it was freezing. I just know it was freezing to the point where they allowed us to have, a beanie cap on. We could put a snivel bottom and tops on. And, only when the RIs told you that. And then we went down to Florida. And when we got to Florida, it was still cold. And the directive on what to wear or not wear was not really clear. So I still had warm weather bottoms on, right? And been in Ranger School, unless you don't have snivel gear on unless they tell you. And I remember we got up, the sun had come up, so it started to get a little warm, and I got up and I started walking out. We're going on patrol. And then RI goes, "Hey, Ranger, you okay?" I'm like, "Roger, Sergeant." And he's like, are you wearing snivel gear? And it was like that fleeting moment where I'm like, holy shit, this can go one or two ways.
Right.
If I say no, he's going to check, and then I'm done. Right? Because I'm not supposed to have snivel gear on. If I say yes, I'm screwed. So I'm like, holy crap. And I was like, well, yeah, Roger. I just tried to play it off as like nonchalant. I was like, well, of course I got it on. And then he stopped, brought the entire platoon back, made us all strip. Thankfully, Mark, of the 26 or 27 that were in the platoon still, there was like 22 other Rangers that had snivel gear on.
What a relief. As everyone's stripping, and your heart must have been pounding. And then one by one, you're like, okay, he's got,
Yeah, exactly. Like, I thought I was done. I was like, that's it. I'm done. My life's over. My career's over. I still remember it was Ranger Instructor Carter. I remember he wanted to like DX us all. Right. So I remember him for two things. One, he wanted to DX us all. And when we were finally finished Florida phase, he was singing Life's Been Good by Joe Walsh. And so anytime I hear that song, I think of that guy, that Ranger instructor walking down the road thinking, man, he also wanted to get rid of us. Good Ranger instructor. But, those moments you remember of, it's kind of one of those, hey, the lesson of being, hey, you got a split second, just better to be honest than try to lie. Because if you lie, now you're going to be, DX'd for integrity violation.
What did they say to the entire platoon?
Oh, they hammered us, right? And we all ended up getting like a major minus. Like everybody got like a major minus.
But at least you weren't alone.
That's right. At least I wasn't alone. And I didn't rat anybody out. I was like, well, yeah, of course I got snivel gear on, right? I mean, I got them on. And then he just brought them all back in. We all got major minuses. And, I went from true blue to like, holy crap, I don't know if I'm going to get through Florida phase here. And I threw up a lot, right? Because every break we got the food packages. And I would eat it all. And every break I threw up between Ranger School classes.
Did you end up getting recycled, or you made it all the way through first shot?
I made it all the way through.
Wow, that's unreal.
I made it all the way through. It was.
I mean, it's not like being. I only ask, and for those who haven't been to Ranger School listening or civilians, like getting recycled, you get injured or whatever. They don't kick you out. They just make you wait until you're 100% clear and send you back in with the next class. And being recycled isn't a shame, but it's just, a lot of guys, it happens to. They get hurt, they get injured or whatever, or they fail a block of instruction, whatever, and they have to go repeat it. And so it's not uncommon. But to do it, there's not a lot of guys who make it in one shot without a recycle.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was thankful, right? And until you're told, like the biggest fear is like you go all the way through to Florida, and they're like, hey, we're going to give you a day one recycle. And you're like, holy crap, like now, because the mental aspect of, can you imagine just having to do the entire thing over again? So it was big. It was like a big, it still remains a, really proud accomplishment, because you do walk out of there just feeling confident about yourself and, what you can endure, what the human body can endure as well.
Yeah. My first awakening in the Army, I'll never forget this. And similar to your story, and I'll condense it here real quick. I did my first ever sticks lane while on ROTC, and we were doing drills, whether it was an ambush, a react to contact, or recon, whatever it was. And I forget even what the nature of the mission was, but I was the squad leader at the time, and I still chuckle at this to this day. It's me, and 7 other guys. We're going out and patrolling through the woods. And then a pop shot happens and everybody gets down. And I have the sticks instructor, the sticks lane manager sitting next to me. He's like, all right, squad leader, what are you going to do? And then I start making these calls to try to move people up online. And then boom, another pop shot goes off. He's like, okay, he's injured. I'm like, okay, we'll get the 8th Litter team, go over there, get him. So I call the 8th Litter team, and then the 8th Litter team, boom, boom, they just got shot. I'm like, okay, we'll move these guys up online. He's like, boom, he just got injured. I'm like, secondary 8th Litter team. And eventually, after like 4 or 5 guys went down, he looked at me and said, hey, stupid. Are you going to keep sending your guys up there to get shot? Or are you actually going to realize that you need to break contact and get out of here? I went, oh, I thought I was just trying to get to the end. So, I got laughed at by all my classmates in ROTC. I'm like, yeah, I pretty much botched that one. So I never made that mistake again. Certainly not in combat. Thank God. I understood when to break contact and get the hell out of Dodge.
No one to cut your losses.
Thank God it was just blanks. Anyway, but it was those are the hard lessons, right? You never forget those things, and they stay with you throughout your entire career. So when you get that Ranger tab put on you and you're leaving, and I know you got a smile as big as the sun. Do you kind of get a sense, and this is what year, by the way, when you finished Ranger School?
It would have been the fall of '97.
Okay.
Fall of '97.
So you head off the Ranger Regiment. Do you know what you're getting into at this point with the Ranger Regiment?
Well, not yet, right? So from Ranger School, I go to the 101st, then I go to Ranger Regiment.
Okay, so you went back to the 101st. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So before I even got to the 101st, I went to OBC, Infantry Officer Basic Course, Ranger School, then the 101st.
Gotcha. I'm sorry. I thought before when I asked you if you went to the unit first, you had said that you went to unit.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, so,
It's all good. So after 101st, did you want to go to the Ranger Regiment? Did you ask to go there, or was that just sort of like because you're tab now, at some point you're going to end up there?
no, I wanted to go there, right? So
Okay.
your battalion commander had the sign off, regimental commander had to sign off for you to go. So it's the same thing, there's an assessment and selection process. So you send your packet in, go down, do the evaluation, the assessment, and then go to the board, and then they select you or they don't select you.
Gotcha. So I'll fast forward a little bit, but you're in the Ranger Regiment until up until 9/11, right?
Yes, I went to school right before it.
Oh, really?
Yes, I went to Infantry Captain's Career Course. I think it was June or July of 2001.
So
Yeah,
that's
of
where you
course.
were, obviously, when 9/11 happened.
Yes. And of course, I was pissed, right? Because on my birthday, the Rangers jumped into Afghanistan. And I thought, man, I was trying to figure out, can I go back? Do I have to go to school right now, at the time? Because everybody knew after 9/11, if anybody was going somewhere, like Rangers were at least going to go somewhere.
Right.
And I thought, I thought I missed it, right? I thought I missed the opportunity. Little did I know. And I remember.
I'll never not chuckle when I have people on this show and they say that. I thought I was going to miss the war. Yeah, a lot of us thought we were all going to miss the war.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I remember specifically good buddies of mine, Dan Ferris and Ryan McCarthy they were there. They came back, and Ryan was specifically like, Dave, don't worry. Like you're going to get your shot. Like, of course, like you said, little did I know, or little did anybody know, we'd get our shot and then our shot and then our shot and then our shot.
So eight total deployments. When is your first one?
First one is the invasion
of Iraq.
So at that point I was a 3rd ID. So after 3rd Battalion, went to 3rd Brigade, 3rd ID. It was then Colonel Dan Allen, who was my battalion commander in 3rd Ranger Battalion.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah,
so you're part of the initial assault force with 3ID.
Yes. Yeah. So in 2002, we were in Kuwait, came back, and we kind of knew, right? We kind of knew we were coming back, because instead of putting all our vehicles back down at port, we just put them in the FOBs out in the desert. So we kind of knew we were coming back.
Right.
And, I guess we deployed back for a little bit, maybe a month or 2 months, and went back in January.
Of 03.
Of 03.
When you get back there, like, what do you hear? Take me through what you're hearing and what the, I guess lead up. I mean, obviously, you're invading and simply you have to go take the city, right? I mean, this is both symbolic and militarily and tactically, what happens. But like at this age, are you able to understand and comprehend like the nature of the assignment and the impact of it?
I think so, right? I mean, we're all still kind of young at that point. I mean, that was 2003, so I guess, that's public math. I guess I was almost 30, or I was 30, something like that, 31. Don't hold me to it. So I think so, right? But it's still kind of surreal. Like I remember when we were. Well, I do specifically remember planning. I knew we had no phase 4, phase 5, or whatever it was. Like after we secure whatever, then what are we going to do? And I just very distinctly remember there being no clear plan, which we all know clearly at this point in time there was no really clear plan for what do we do after we get there. Once we have Baghdad, what do we do? And it was really surreal. It was just kind of surreal sitting out there. And when we were on the border, right? When we were on the border, it was just kind of like, when's it going to happen? We kind of knew it was. But it is. It's like surreal, right? Because, most of us at that point had grown up just watching war movies, right? We just grown up watching war movies and those things, Platoon, Full Metal Jacket, Hamburger Hill, Apocalypse Now, all these things, the TV show Tour of Duty, for any of those you remember that show. These are all the things you have in mind. And then the next thing rockets are going off and you're crossing the border into, another country. Really just kind of have no idea what to expect. But at the same time, feeling proud because of what you're doing. Again, now it's probably another whole discussion of the feelings of Iraq then versus the feelings of Iraq now. But yeah, it's one of those, you're just kind of like, holy shit, man, we're getting ready to invade a country here.
What's it like when you start to get close to the city and you start to see and feel combat for the first time live for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting. At that point, I was in the assault CP, so I was up behind the lead battalion,
Mm-hmm.
and I was really kind of fortunate, I guess, in a way, because I had a lot of control with the battalion commanders in terms of being able to track and the movement, because I was way ahead of the TOC. I was right behind the lead battalion, and for the most part, yeah, I guess it's surreal trying to just think about it, because you're so engrossed in just doing your job and being aware of what's going on. And we had a lot of success. If I recall, like, the unit didn't have their first casualty until we got to the north side of Baghdad. Obviously, I think we were further north when the convoy got ambushed in, I can't remember the name of the city, but it's, when you start hearing about casualties, then it starts becoming real. Like, holy crap, this can, anything can happen to anybody at any given time. Or when we stopped and we're literally just in the desert hanging out.
Yeah, it's always that seminal moment, whether it's the first bullet whizzes by your head or the first report that somebody actually got hit and or killed, where you start to realize it's not simulation, it's not a video game, it's not training. This is life and death, literally. And any moment, any decision could have a major impact on that. And so,
yeah, we're not invincible.
No.
Like, holy crap, we're not invincible. And then, some of the company commanders were really good friends of mine that were out there. And of course, you also have that guilty feeling, right? Like, you're in the assault CP and your buddies and everybody else is out on the direct line, and you're like, man, once again, because we all have that. I want to prove myself.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
that crazy guilt we feel if we're not doing certain things in our lives. But it was. Yeah, that was crazy. That was just a crazy first few months, knowing, once we got to Baghdad, how we used to get to the green zone, to like literally just seeing how people change, right? From celebrating things to not celebrating things.
Yeah. How long were you there for that first time? I mean, you do the invasion in March, obviously.
Yeah, I did the invasion in March. So we came back in July, I guess, of that year, July of 03. And, Mark, the one thing I always remember, it'll stick with me till the dad died. When we switched, right, when we went from like combat operations to
Sustainment, if you will.
Yeah, whatever you want to call it, sustainment. And, Dave, you're now the education guy. Go do education stuff. I'm like, what? You want me to do what? Like, we were just doing combat operations. Now we flipped. I remember an NGO came down, and a Iraqi cab driver dropped her off, and she went in, and I was talking to him, and I was just curious. We were about 3 months in at this point. We were there maybe 3 months. And I just remember talking to him, and I was like, hey, so what do you think about, this? What do you think about Saddam being gone? And, all those talks about celebrating, that it was true when we were first there. I mean, it was, thank you, Mr. Bush, America's the best. And I asked him, and he goes, no, we're happy you got Saddam out of power, but if you are still here in 3 more months, we are going to try to kill you all too.
Okay.
Plain as day. I mean, he was like thankful. He's like, but if you're here, we're going to try to kill you in about 3 months.
Yeah.
And
I wish you would have said that to somebody in the government. That might have been useful information for us to have.
oh, do you think they would have listened?
No, but that's neither here nor there. At least we would have had a place to lay blame, 20 years
exactly.
later. Still looking for that. You got to blame somebody, right? So you get back home. And then once you get back, are you off to Ranger Regiment?
No, so when I get back, then I take command, right? So then I take command in 3rd ID.
Okay.
And that was probably one of the most tumultuous years. So the day I took command, we had a soldier that was missing. Specialist Davis had a soldier was missing. And so, I took command that day. He was failure to report, then listed AWOL. And come to find out, in November that year, right? Because we just assumed he was AWOL. November that year, found out that he was actually killed by, I think it was 3 other soldiers in the company.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, down in Fort Benning. So one of them was talking about it, bragging about it, and a young private heard it and brought it to me and my first sergeant's attention. Reported to the MPs or CID, and CID went out and found the remains. And it was just a tough 12 months, because I was talking to CID probably more than my commander. They were there every day, talking to everybody in the unit, trying to figure out what happened. It was just one of those things, like, that's what you don't think is going to happen when you take a company command for the very first time. But outside that, it was great, because I was able to take some of the lessons from 3rd Battalion into the mechanized world. We can start introducing shoot house stuff, close quarters combat,
right?
Demo. Great friend of mine that I work with now, Vern Tubbs. We met, during the invasion. We served together, so that connection came on. It was just tough, right? At 12 months, I was putting my pack to go back to Ranger Regiment.
Which is interesting, because while you're in the Ranger Regiment, you deploy 4 more times to Iraq, right?
Mm-hmm. I think for 1st Battalion, that's correct.
Okay. At some point in time, are you asking, aren't I ever supposed to be in Afghanistan, or you didn't care?
Yeah, I think at that point I probably didn't really care, right? Because Afghanistan, it kind of...
There was enough combat to go around.
That's right. Like, so in Iraq, everything was, at that point, everything, the tide started shifting to Iraq, and my first two trips there were in Mosul. So I spent 2 in Mosul and 2 in Ramadi. 2 in Ramadi were the most dynamic, because then I was a Ranger company commander at that point in time.
Okay.
But yeah, I hadn't really thought about Afghanistan. I never thought I would even see Afghanistan at that point in time, because Afghanistan was kind of the sideshow.
Everything had chilled. Honestly, by the time Iraq kicked off, Afghanistan was like less dangerous than Iraq was. And I was there in 05 and 06 preceding the surge. And when Fallujah and Ramadi were that and Sadr City were the most dangerous places in the entire country.
Crazy Ramadi, whoever those dudes, 2 guys were that made that video, Crazy Ramadi, bombs under the street, that's what it was like.
So as you get more of a taste for combat here, and I guess taste is the wrong word, as your combat experience grows, is there any sense about you that, one is like, I'm going to die at some point if I keep doing this, or 2, to what end are we doing this? Are we actually making a difference? Are we actually making an impact? And I don't know how many guys you may have lost to casualties, injuries, and KIAs or whatever, but at some point in time, that stuff, if it is happening at a regular basis, has got to at least weigh on you a little bit, no?
Yeah, it is. And, fortunately, when I was in company command, so at that point I was still young enough, right? So I was still kind of all, I'm going to say all in, but I'm still like, hey, this is the mission. We're going to go get these bad guys. And, fortunately in company command, Alpha Company, 1st Ranger Battalion, we had wounded Rangers, did not lose anybody, which, of course I'm massively thankful for. And at that point, though, I hadn't really thought about, it wasn't really until 2010, maybe, when I was in Afghanistan, and the job I held there, that I started to really start wondering what exactly are we, like, what is the end state here?
Mm-hmm.
Is what we're doing in the end of this really going to make a difference? Like in Afghanistan, the way Afghanistan is, when I was there in 2010, I could have predicted exactly what happened with the withdrawal.
Really?
That was my feeling, right? My feeling was, I always felt personally like Iraq had the chance, right? Because Iraq was a lot of great, amazing history for the world, right? And they had some infrastructures. They were largely, really.
They had roads and electricity and plumbing. Let's start there.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. Afghanistan, I thought this is just not going to. It's not going to work. When I was in Kandahar, and I guess it was 2010, one of the strike forces came back, and I remember they said specifically where they were, the Afghans thought they were Russians. Like, I mean, that's kind of like, holy crap. Like, it was just like, we're living in
You're about 25 years behind there, pal.
Yeah, 25 years behind. And you could just kind of see, right, the dynamics on how things were doing, like the parallels between Afghanistan and Iraq. I just started seeing like, hey, the bigger issue is also Pakistan. We're not really addressing it. And, it's like, hey, you go out and you're sending the boys out and they're going after someone that's, here's the silhouette of the guy. Here's the silhouette of Mark. And then the boys go back home, and then we come back 6 months later and they're like, all right, now here's the picture of Mark, because we detained him and now he's released and now he's back doing the same thing. And you start to just, at least for me, it was just, the thoughts of where are we going at the end of this? If this is just kind of the issue. One of the hardest questions I ever got asked is, I went into one of the common operator or the jocks for one of the companies, and they were like, hey, what are we doing? And at this point I was the task force commander, and I was like, oh man, that's a hard question. Right. That was a tough question to answer. And
you quickly just regurgitate the company line. We're fighting the war on terror.
I actually didn't, Mark.
Oh, really?
Like, that was because, I mean, the boys are smart, right? Like, they know if you're pulling wool over their heads or over their eyes. And I walked in. John Lancaster, he was the first sergeant, was in there. Super smart Ranger, good man right there. And they, some of the Rangers just asked, and I didn't toe the party line. I just said, hey, this is, I don't know the exact words I said, but I wasn't trying to make it, all chocolate rivers and gumdrops and ice cream cones. It was like, hey, this is, what we can focus on is what we can control, and that's taking care of ourselves. And
I was told I had that same conversation with a major there. I've told this story before, but she just told me small victories, win the ones you can, and that's it. And hopefully, a lot of small victories end up to a big victory. But
control what you can, and we adjusted how we did some missions to ensure, like, hey, let's do what we can and try to bring everybody home and do our job. Like, all we can control is our piece of the pie.
While you were in Iraq, I mean, we talked a moment ago about casualties and everything else, but is there anyone that sticks out in particular with you?
Yeah, well, there's a couple, right? There's a couple missions that really, stick out. One, some that I got some really good lessons learned on is we were out. We did a remain over day. I think it was the first remain over day that anybody had done. And we didn't really need to do it, right? We had gotten the guys we'd wanted. And they came, helicopters came in, took the two guys out, and they're like, all right, you guys are going to stay. And I didn't really know why we were staying, because there was no reason to really stay, because we'd gotten what we wanted. I still felt it was, and I still feel it was kind of like just to prove a point. And I thought it was an unnecessary risk, right? We weren't prepared. We went out the night prior. It's like hot as hell in July. So by the time we get out, now we're in the middle of, this is not friendly air territory. This is like, so just like you said, this is 2006, 7. So Ramadi Fallujah area was just, every mission, the second rotation in Ramadi, like every night was kinetic. Like there was almost a firefight every single night.
Yeah.
And that's one where, man, I'm glad nobody got hurt. I mean, we ended up hunkering down and strong pointing in the building, and we ended up getting ambushed. And man, that was scary. That was probably the one of the times I was like, I was scared shitless because I was dehydrated. I made some decisions. Some people may think it was right. I don't think it was. Me and my first sergeant both were trying to look out for the boys. So we had two platoons, and neither one of us wanted to send the other platoon out and take that risk. So we both went out. Man, we came back. Man, it was so damn hot, Mark. I mean, hell, we were probably close to having, mass heat casualty. Fortunately, nobody got hurt. Now you can laugh about some of these things. But there's, there was one that was just amazingly fortunate that nobody, some Rangers got wounded. But God, how none of them died is amazing, because one of them got hit like 11 times. Domingue got 11 times. I think it was 11. Might have been more. but I mean, he ended up getting hit in the arm, but you could see the rounds that hit his rifle. It went through his cargo pants. One on the back, like right on the back of the helmet, just that little lip hit there. Ranger Floyd lost, part of one of his fingers, and it's, that's when you're just like, holy crap, that was fortunate.
At what point in time after these first, 5 deployments to Iraq, is there a point in time where you're starting to think I've done enough, or do you still have that same sort of piss and vinegar that I just wanted to complete Ranger School kind of deal?
No, I was still all in, right? I mean, after my last deployment in 1st Battalion, I went to the intermediate level education, ILE at Leavenworth, and I was smoked. I mean, I was tired by that point. Because, for those that don't, the rotation was 3 or 4 months away, back 6 or 7, but you're training to go again.
Right.
So then when I got to ILE, like, I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to be involved in anything. I just wanted to go to class. I didn't want to try to get my master's in. I just wanted to get to class. It wasn't until 2010, Mark, where, at this point I had missed 1 or 2 Christmases already. And I think it was actually the odd thing of all of it was my last one, my last deployment when I was a task force commander in Afghanistan. I remember having a conversation with my good buddy Jeff Teagues, and we were talking about some of this. And I was running thin at that point. I was like, I just don't know how long I can do this. Missing back-to-back Christmases, missing my kids. And the interesting thing is when I left there, I was scheduled to go to Fort Bragg. And that's when I was going to then talk to my then wife, Susan, about, hey, I don't know if I can keep doing this. Never really had that conversation with her beforehand. We never got to that conversation, right? So I was reaching my limit. She kind of reached her limit. But it's funny. It kind of coincided with that's where I was just starting to, for me personally, the grind was getting, was kind of getting to me at that point. Because, we compartmentalize the hell out of stuff more.
Sure. No. And again, I do want to address it when you ended up taking over at JSOC, a Joint Special Operations Command, and the task force there in Afghanistan. Because, once you get there and you're in 2008, things are starting to actually pick back up in 2008, 2009, 2010, right? Like Afghanistan is starting to heat up again. Difference between Iraq combat and Afghanistan combat is pretty dynamic for those who are not military members and haven't been to both. But what stood out to it about you the most?
Well, so my first one over there, I was a operations officer in Kandahar, and the second one, I was a task force commander in Koust, and that was. Yeah, it was definitely different, right? Like you weren't driving anywhere, you were flying everywhere. And for me personally, like that was the most stressful deployment I probably had because I had a lot more people I was responsible for in sending out. And for me, it was a lot of no sleep. I was stressed the hell out on that one, Mark, because I felt even a larger responsibility because I had so many people, and I was a major. And all the other commanders were, other sister service special operations unit, 05s, lieutenant colonels. It was an honor, but I just, I felt a lot of pressure again to just do the right thing, bring everybody home. And
were you in Coast in 2009 into 2010?
Yeah, I think it would have been 2010 into 11. That Christmas was when I was in Coast.
The only reason I ask is because that was the New Year's Eve where the bombing happened and all the CIA agents were killed at Camp Chapman.
Yeah, I think I was in Kandahar for that one.
Okay,
I was in Kandahar for that because when was that one, Mark? I think it was
December
in Kandahar.
31st, 2009. It was, if I recall correctly.
9 to 10. Yeah, it's terrible when they get that many. It's like I just know I missed 2 Christmases, and I think it was 10 and 11, or no, it was 9 and 10. Because 11 is when I left. Yeah, so I would have been in Kandahar during that time frame.
Hold on, I just want to double check the date that had happened. And again, yeah, I think maybe it was 2010. It was New Year's Eve 2010. into 2011.
And I mean, God, and I remember, man, like, at that time, some of the rules of engagement changed drastically from when I was a company commander to now the way the guys had to operate. And I just remember, man, how difficult that must have been for them, because it was far more restrictive than when I was a Ranger company commander.
Yeah, no, and again, it nonstop never changes, right? So when you say you're getting wiped out by the end of this thing, are you done with the deployment combat phase, but still want to stay in, or are you actually still you contemplating getting out altogether at this point?
No, I was at that point. I wasn't really sure, right? Like I really wasn't sure what I was going to do, and it was kind of one of those. I was almost prepping to have that discussion with Susan, because I never really had that discussion with anybody. Like, and then of course, how do you feel about that, right? Because part of it is like, man, you feel bad for saying that, because my mindset was operations, right? I had my own views and thoughts for anybody that went somewhere else other than operations, right? So from 02, I was always in an operational unit. So 02 to 11, it was either 3rd ID, then 1st Ranger Battalion, 10 months at school, then back at 2nd Ranger Battalion, doing the deployment cycle again. So I didn't really know, Mark. I just didn't know if I could do the same stuff. But then once I got divorced, like then that shifted everything. Like that shifted the entire paradigm completely.
Right. And now I know you end up going to the old guard as your final assignment. Was leaving the Ranger Regiment and that whole lifestyle or that whole sort of mentality of the military, was that a difficult choice for you?
It was at first, but it wasn't right away, right? So after I left 2nd Ranger Battalion, I was supposed to go to Fort Bragg in JSOC headquarters.
Okay.
But because of the divorce that I was now going through, I ended up as the JSOC liaison in the Pentagon, because I had, great leaders that took care of me, General Thomas, Tony Thomas, General Eric Carrilla, General Rich Clark. Like these guys took care of me. They're like, hey, we'll find a spot with you in JSOC up in DC. So that's how I ended up back in Maryland, so I could be around my kids. So, the fascinating thing, though, Mark, is like that was crazy difficult, but it was one of the most educational experiences I ever had.
Yeah. I mean, anybody who's worked in the Pentagon gets a whole different view of the Department of Defense than anybody who just wore a uniform, right? There's a whole different level of beast and animal that is. And I never had the opportunity. And honestly, even now as an 06, like if they have offered me a job up there, I don't know if I could take it. I feel like I've experienced too much and I've seen too much of the sour side of things for me to be able to walk in there. And we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, play the game to the level that needs to be played to be effective. Yeah,
it was, for me, it was intriguing because, I had spent my entire time in a regiment kind of at the battalion level. So my scope was like this.
Right.
Then I got in the Pentagon and the aperture was like this, like, holy crap. There's a lot of things going on in the world, particularly within the special operations world, that I didn't really have any idea about. So it was interesting, right? It was fascinating. I didn't mind it because I got to be around a whole bunch of different people on the joint staff, the policy side. But then it's like at the end of the 3rd year, I'd taken no vacation the first 2 years because I was the only guy. And I used to laugh, like when we were on like the National Mission Force, I got called into the Pentagon more when I was the JSOC L&O than I ever did when I was like on the, we were on alert in a Ranger Regiment. So much so my kids had a ready bag, and they could see on the TV, like the number would come up on the TV because I get a text, I get a phone call, my cell phone would ring, the kids and I'd be running off into the Pentagon like 2 a.m. But we had some great memories. One of the kids always played football in the parking lot. And then the other one got to play catch because I have 2 kids, son and daughter, Michael and Allison. Whoever played catch in the parking lot, the other one was playing catch to the office, down the hallways of the Pentagon. So, at least we got some good memories out of it. But it was, by the time I left there 3 years later, I was like, it was great to see behind the curtain, but man, I don't want to see behind the curtain anymore.
Yeah, that's the whole sausage principle, right? Like, I don't need to know how it's made. Let's just make it taste good. And sometimes seeing how the whole thing is made can definitely alter your view of things. Right?
Yeah. I'm afraid to just go live on a mountain.
It's one of those things where I think, you talk before about, like, when you talk with your soldier about what are we doing? Like, what is the goal here? And you're trying to answer that question. And then you get behind the curtain and you start to get some of the answers to those questions. And they're not as existential as you'd like them to be. They're really not, right? Like,
Yeah.
there is a lot more, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, but it feels like there's a lot more, dart in the dark throwing to a certain extent. That's such a disconnect with the ground and what goes on, that there is a sense of how are you literally making this decision for what is going to happen here when you are completely unaware of the situation here? Because I've lived it. I've been there. I know what it's like, and I can tell you never have because of the things that you're saying and how you're reacting.
You're right. I mean, there were some things, that I would end up briefing, and there was questions that would sometimes be asked, that would be asked. And, my thought was, I have no idea why you're asking this question. Like, there are layers of leadership before it gets to that point. I am confident that someone is worried about that. Like, shouldn't you be asking bigger questions than this specifically?
Yeah.
And it was, frustrating, but you had to answer the questions, right? Because policy is going to prove something. So you got to get the answer to the question, but sometimes it wouldn't happen. And I always said, sometimes no is not the answer. It's like, let's just continue to throw sand in the wheel, and it'll stop without ever having to say no. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's kind of like, we really didn't say no. We just never got to the answer. And the amount of time it would take for some decision to be made. I mean, we had a whiteboard on the wall, and when one of my buddies came in, Dan Ferris, same guy I mentioned before, he came in. I remember we had all these things on the board, and he would want to get them done. I'm like, Dan, you see some of these things? They've been here for like 6 months. They're going to be here when I leave, and you're still here, and they would be, right? And they would still be there. And it's just, it's amazing to see, but at the same time, you just kind of wonder. Sometimes you can get frustrated, right? It's a lot of respect for anybody who can manage, stay in that world for so many years and run it. I'm glad there's people like that, because I couldn't do it for that long.
Right.
I couldn't do it for that long.
So after JSOC in the Pentagon, do you get told you're going to the old guard, or you request it, or how does that whole thing unfold?
So yeah, I mean, I requested, because it's, and I remember talking to one of my mentors, General Carrilla, about it, because he was at JSOC at the time I was in the Pentagon. And at this point, like, I went through a divorce as a kid myself.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm at this point where, decisions are a little bit easier, right? The decisions are a little bit easier of, like, I don't want to leave my kids. I want command. I would love command, but I don't want to go, if they said, hey, you're going to go here, I would have a decision of, do I really want to leave my kids? And at that point, nothing was going to be as relevant as the kids. And
right.
So I put, at this point it was 1st Battalion, 3rd Infantry. And, it was interesting because throughout my military career, when you'd go to HRC, it was always like second commands and stuff. It was Ranger Regiment, Old Guard, Ranger Regiment, Old Guard. And I never thought I'd end up at the Old Guard. But man, I tell you what a just an amazing assignment. I mean, I can just consider myself amazingly lucky to have served there.
Why?
It was like the biggest honor. So the battalion I commanded, 1st Battalion, 3rd Infantry, was responsible for the military service funerals in Arlington for the Army. Also had the Presidential Salute Battery, and then the caisson platoon, the horse-drawn carries the caskets. And I think it was just, not knowing. I didn't know what I didn't know. I mean, it's an infantry unit, but it's largely focused, obviously, on ceremonies in Arlington National Cemetery. Man, it's just an honor, right? I mean, it is just the most humbling thing. And I think it's like you'd walk into the Arlington National Cemetery, and there's just like this peace to it, right? There's no race, there's no religion, there's no politics, there's no right or wrong. It doesn't matter. It's like the mission's very clear, right? The mission is very clear. You know what you're doing. You're never going to talk to one of the family members outside of, rendering the honors when you present the flag. But you just know, right? It's like, you're the last thing a family's going to see when they lay their loved ones to rest. And it's like the immediate feed, like, for a fact what you're doing is mattering to somebody.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that point of view. I just don't know if I could do it. Like, I don't know if I'm emotionally equipped to deal with people's loss over and over again. Like at a certain point when you've lost a lot, you feel like, how much more suffering do I have to look at? Did you never got emotionally overwhelmed by any of it?
Well, no, I'm not going to say I never did, right? But you try to like bring it in. Like, so the very first time I ever presented a flag, now again, granted, I presented as much as I could as a commander, but not nearly as much as the company commanders and the officers and non-commissioned officers. But I remember the first time I presented the flag, I was like, don't screw this up and get the words out. Like, get the words out without, like getting emotional and stuttering. And then after a while, like, I just made it for me, like, I wanted to make eye contact because I wanted them to know that's the only way you could kind of show an emotion and connection beyond just presenting the flag, because things are very scripted on how you present things and do things. But like that connection of, hey, this is meaningful. And then, any of the active duty ones were hard, particularly, I presented to the spouse and then 3 kids. That's hard because you're thinking about your own kids.
Right. Obviously.
Their father is killed. It's just, it was, man, that was just such an honorable place. And then when we had repatriations, when they would find remains from World War II, and they would, bring them by, the remains would land at Reagan National Airport, and a casket team would go out, and then they would bury, the remains in Arlington. You're like, yeah, we're, no matter what, as much as you can, someone's going to come and, you're going to be found, and you're going to be brought home, and you're going to be laid to rest. It's just a truly amazing place.
Yeah. I mean, again, all the credit in the world to you. I don't know how you pull it off. Did you ever end up having to bury somebody you knew?
I did not. Now, there was Sergeant Major Wardell Turner. He was killed. So Wardell Turner was in basic training. He and I went to basic training together. I used to call him Bulldog. Went to Towson University up in Maryland.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, we stayed in touch, but he's like one of those guys. I mean, he'd been in the Army already when I went to basic training, right? Now, I got the requisite Dear John letter in basic training also. So he was, he was like my big brother that kind of carried me through. And that was, that was hard because he meant a lot to me, because he was like a big brother, father figure in basic training because he was older. And, he got killed as a sergeant major, and that was tough. That was tough because, his wife was there, and he's, when someone's like, someone who's got that personal impact to you, those are hard ones. Those are hard ones. And I would, I'd always try to go out and, my uncle's buried there. My grandfather's buried there. So I think some of the hard things were like around Memorial Day.
Sure.
When you were out and, you see spouses, parents, loved ones, laying there or sitting there at the graveside with cakes or birthday cakes or, chairs, food, drinks, just.
Is all this in Section 60 mostly?
Yeah, most of it was in Section 60.
And for those who don't know, Section 60 is where all the GWAT, the Global War on Terror veterans are buried. Have you gone back a bunch since you've left that post? I mean, do you go back often to visit, or you don't go?
No, I do, because it's it's not too far from where I'm at, and
right. That's why I asked. Yeah,
and I'm fortunate. It's probably kind of not the right word, but because my grandparents were buried there, I've got a pass. So okay. I can drive in, and I can go to their I can go to their gravesite. I go to my uncle's gravesite, who I just finally found his son about 3 months ago. been chasing him or trying to find him my entire life. So yeah, it's still, and anybody visits, I like to take people through because I can give them a different perspective of the cemetery than
Yeah, I mean, I highly recommend this to any veteran or whatever if you've never done this, or even a civilian. I've been to Arlington before, but I'm obviously not back up there all that often. But I go down to Fort Stewart a lot for training, and 3ID has right outside their main parade field. They have all these trees that they planted for everybody in 3ID who was killed in action, and there's a pamphlet there you can walk through, and they. Again, with 3ID being the initial invasion of Iraq, they've certainly have shared their fair share of losses in the global war on terror. But when I was in battalion command and we were doing some training down there, I carved out about 2 hours in the morning because I did this by myself first, but I thought it was useful for my staff. But I carved out about 2 hours in the morning, and I said, guys, we're going to go there, and I just want you to walk around. I want you to walk around. I want you to read the names. I want you to read their stories. I want you to see the notes and the things that people have left by those trees. And every time I go there, I still get emotional about it. The new notes that are there, little kids leaving something for their father, a toy, and everything. And you're like, this is a kid. It overwhelms you, especially if you're a parent. This is a kid who knows he's never going to see his dad again, but this is the way he plays with his dad. He or she plays with their dad is by leaving this little toy on this memorial tree. And I think it's so important to connect ourselves not only with those who made the ultimate sacrifice, but with the bonds of service, and understanding that even in death, there's still a brotherhood and a sisterhood for all of us that we remain eternally connected by. And for me, at least, it is a good compass recheck to remind myself that whatever you're doing in uniform, there's always a bigger picture involved that extends beyond you.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think it's a great thing. And if someone's not been there, they should. And you're right, reading the names and the stories. We would get a list of everybody, and it was always fascinating. Like you would get a list of the funerals, and you'd look and you'd see what it's like the history. And you're like, holy crap, this person from this World War II's got silver stars and purple hearts, and you're just like, holy crap, and the sad ones were occasionally there was one or two in which there was no family member, family member there, and that's those are hard, but it was truly just an honorable and humbling assignment. It almost felt like I hadn't planned on retiring at that point, but it was like it ended up being like the most surreal capstone to the military at that point in time.
Yeah. So take me through what do you call it? Take me through that decision when you go to retire, and do you know what you want to do next?
Well, so I changed command in June of 2016, and in 2014 I went on like my first solo trip. Really sounds crazy. Like in my 40s, I went to Zion National Park, and man, I was like, man, this is living. This is great. But mountains had always been calling me, right? Mountains always been calling me. When I was out in 275, never climbed Rainier. So I was like, all right, for change of command. At this point, I was on orders for the National Defense University in D.C. So I went out, looked for a mountain to climb, and I went out, and there was, I looked up Mount Shasta, California. I changed command on, I think it was a Friday. It was the Thursday or Friday. Flew out to California. Summited Mount Shasta the following week, and when I was out there, that just experience was very impactful in my life. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the decision of, I came back, told my commander the next week, Colonel, that was General now, but at the time, Colonel Johnny K. Davis, I was going to retire. And he's like, Dave, are you sure you're just not on like some emotional high from climbing the mountain? I'm like, well, I am, but like, a good officer, I NBMP'd everything and did some pros and cons to make sure I took the emotion out of my decision making. And I made a decision. So the hardest part was deciding to retire. I spent a lot of time talking to, now General Carrillo about it, and then actually admitting it and accepting like, hey, I've got kids going into high school. I'm not going to be willing to go anywhere away from them.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of like I can't give the Army what the Army needs, and the Army can't give me what I need anymore. because at this point my family was, my kids were the most important thing
Sure.
to me.
And so with that, what's your exit strategy? Much like taking Baghdad, did you know what was next?
No, and just much like Baghdad, no, I didn't know what was next, right? I had absolutely no clue. I made a decision, and I had about a year, man. It was almost a wasted year because I just did not, I'd spent all these times in operational units and doing something. I had about a year before I retired. And of course, this is the only time the big Army HRC ever that I really ever talked to. And actually, there's 2 times in my life that I ever really needed HRC that I'm sorry for anybody who's with HRC, right? The first time was as I was going through a divorce. I was doing my own work to see if I could get reassigned somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, oh, well, we can send you down here. And it was like absolutely no help. And then when I made the decision to retire, they tried to reach down in and send me out on a tasking for a year, my final year to Afghanistan. And fortunately, the G3 and the CG for Military District of Washington were like, hold on, time out. The reason he's making these decisions is exactly because of this. But I was paralyzed, Mark, because I was so used to doing something. I almost felt guilty that I didn't have anything to do. So I was paralyzed with stress and anxiety. I was paralyzed with inaction.
Yeah.
I went to a couple of really good nonprofits during that time frame that really ended up helping me out, but I didn't really have a strategy. I really didn't have a strategy. It was the most important thing that I did during that time frame was understand my own personal values, because at that point, it was the Army values, it was Ranger Creed.
Sure.
That's how I lived my life, but I'd never taken the time to say, okay, well, what are my own personal, my personal values.
And is that where the idea of working in the leadership field comes in?
Yeah, and it didn't even exist at the time. I came on at the time, it was LDR Growth Partners. They hired me on as a 1099 contractor, and this was around Hurricane Harvey.
Okay.
So I was going down with Team Rubicon to Hurricane Harvey. I got connected to one of the original founders, J.D. Dolan, through Anne Marie Craig, who was running the Commit Foundation, who I went through after the Station Foundation. And she's like, hey, you ought to meet. So JD and I meet, and we're talking, and our values align, and they brought me on doing some Hurricane Harvey stuff. And then one of the partners could not make a leadership event. And that wasn't the main thing they did, right? They were doing mergers, acquisitions. But because they were former military, people kept asking them. So I went up and did an event. They're like, hey, do you want to run the leadership part? I'm like, yeah, sure. So I went from 1099 to W-2, and then we acquired a small company in 2018, then created LDR Leadership, which I've been then running and then became a co-owner of. And yeah, it's been great because it's, I kind of took a shift. I left the military, and we don't do any government work.
Right.
We don't do any government work, and ran into and discovered a program that we've been able to build upon that's, largely based around the individual. Because if you can get someone to understand, emotional intelligence, self-awareness, communication, all this into a program of, going into a company and say, look, here's a program on how you can change a culture, address performance, right? Not just say, hey, here's this grand idea, but hey, here's a program for you to follow. And then we stay with you, right? We're there to help you out if you got questions on addressing performance or positive reinforcement. Just, it's been great, right? I mean, people would ask me what I wanted to do when I retired, and I said, I want to go to NASCAR races and climb mountains. And people laugh.
Good answer.
But Mark, I'm climbing mountains in 2 weeks, and in February, I guess it was June of this year, I took my team down to Daytona.
Awesome.
And everybody got to drive, the cars drive around the track. So it was I was like, somehow this worked out really well to be able to combine a lot of things that I enjoy.
We touched on this a little bit earlier, but the good part and the bad part of the leadership industry, as it continues to grow, it's very young. But again, there seems to be this whole, and for me, this is where it gets dirty, right? It's like you have these guys out here, these former Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Rangers, who get in touch with the right people, and all of a sudden their business is now, well, I'm going to go out there and hang out with professional athletes and make them carry a log together to teach them teamwork. And we sort of co-opted that as a business. And in a way to build and teach leadership and teamwork. Now, I fully believe 100% because being in the Guard for a better part of my career, the civilian sector and working in it has a ton of holes in leadership, a ton. There isn't a bigger sense of team. Many organizations lack it. Many organizations lack the people to have the right, let's just call it a moral code or a bigger value system other than how do I put the most money in my pocket? How do I advance as fast as I can? And so I think that there is room to educate some of those people on that. But I also think that there are some groups out there that are, let's just call it not as honorable as others or have different goals than, let's just say, passing on some leadership traits that we have learned through combat, through hard lessons and loss. That's not the goal that they're trying to pass on to them. It's I don't know, the monetary value side of it feels a little bit icky to me. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, and well, and of course I'm biased, right? Because
sure.
of what I do, but I'm biased in the fact that what I truly think makes us different is, when I'm going to a client or one of my instructors are going to a client, we're not talking about here's what we did in the military, right? Like we're talking about like, hey, here's a program, right? Here's a program to follow, and it's evidence-based. It's not here's what I mean, very rarely do I even try to use military stories unless I have to.
Right.
I can pull on some of those things, but to me and my instructors and my team for the company, it's important for us when we leave, we want to give you tangible tools to utilize that is also evidence-based, right? So like team building is great. Research clearly shows team building has an effect, but only to a certain extent, right? So we have that offering, but that's not the focus because at the end of the day, you've got to focus on a much bigger process, right? On what we're talking about, how do we address performance? How do we positively reinforce somebody? What is a plan? Like, what is a plan to follow? How do you work on individual self-awareness, emotional intelligence, the key aspects of communication, all those things? And you're right, Mark. Like the guys I work with, I've always had a very hard time of even promoting, when I left, it was like, I didn't want to just be retired Lieutenant Colonel Dave Taylor, Army Ranger, right? I've got a lot of life left. So it was like another reason I wanted to go to Georgetown is I wanted to understand the science behind it. So when I was instructing or building a curriculum, it was an evidence-based aspect. It wasn't just here's what I did in the Army, because at a certain point, right, that you reach tracer burnout per se, like stories from 5, 10, 15 years ago. I mean, hell, at this point, we're talking about Ramadi. I mean, hell, that was like crap, 17
years ago, yeah.
17 years ago.
Yeah.
So you can relate to some of those stories, but for me, it's partnering with the company for a program. We've had some of our clients that have been on board 5, 10, 15, 20 years with the program. And then we continue to build upon it because leadership aspects change, like different things change. People face different things. And we go about and we research it and we come back and say, hey, here's what research is saying and here's how we can apply it, right? So, I mean, instructors that are law enforcement, lawyers, business owners. I mean, it's a different thing. And you're right. Like, that's where, I'm with you on it. I think sometimes it can just be broad and someone's brought in because they were this, or this. And just because you were this, or this, the military does not have the cornerstone of leadership. Like I've run into amazing leaders in the corporate world and the electrical cooperative space that, if you're running these organizations and you're running things, I mean, you don't get there by being bad. And I think
it's not luck.
Yeah, it's not luck. And I think it's important there's a lot of leadership lessons that I have taken from leaders that I have seen outside in the corporate world and running these massive organizations that I didn't see. And in some cases harder, right? In some cases harder because, it's like a double-edged sword. If you're in an elite unit that's got an assessment and selection process and everybody wants to be there, that's, it's in some ways maybe easier to lead. Could be harder because everybody may think they got all the answers. But now when you're running an organization where the values and purpose may not all be aligned, it can be harder.
Well, to that end, again, I mean, like you said, the military doesn't have the cornerstone on leadership. We didn't start the leadership business. We're very good at it, and like any organization, we have some people who are really bad at it. That said, there are probably some things we probably can take from the civilian sector, especially inside those Pentagon realms, where it would make their philosophies would apply better at a macro level than ours do, right? Because we are so conditioned that everything is written down for us, and there's always a guideline. And if we stick to the guideline, we're never going to be too far off center of mass, right? Like that's kind of the ideology behind the whole thing. But I've often found some of the best leaders, they don't worry about the manual. They use their brain. They're free thinkers. They're creative, and they find solutions to complex problems that aren't written down in a book somewhere. Going, oh, okay, I got this right here. Yeah, let's just do it this way. Not everything. Not MDMP doesn't fix everything. Fixes a lot of things. COA analysis, I think, is a useful tool in any organization. Course of action analysis is always worthwhile. But that said, it doesn't have to be the end-all, be-all. So I think there's a solid mix there of both that could be used. But again, and this is anything against Navy SEALs or Green Berets or anything, but, like you said, having that title and walking into an NFL organization or a basketball NBA organization and going, I can teach you something because I carried a log or a boat. Yes and no, right? Like some of it feels just more for show than anything else.
Yeah, and Mark, I mean, ideally, we're at the point now where when we're talking to organizations, they don't even really know the background of me until they get to know me. It's like, hey, here's what we do. Here's the company, and I think there's also a thing on an intrinsic and extrinsic motivator. Right? Like there's nothing better than you go out and you're working with a partner or a client, and they reach back out to you and they ask for some help on something you provide it to them, and they send you something back. It's like, hey, that really helped me make a decision or have a conversation or do something like that. You can't put a price tag on that. That's what motivates you, right? Like you can't put a price tag on, Mark, you sending me a message saying, hey, that really made an impact. I was so nervous about doing this, but what you showed me and taught me made an impact like that. That's when you're like, that's why we do this, right? Like that's the things that make you happy. Like that's what warms you up inside. Like, yes, I know that was an impact on somebody. And that's, to me, those are the greatest things that you can get back when someone's like, hey, that was meaningful. I appreciate that.
Biggest lesson from a leadership standpoint you've taken from your military career that you apply to your business now?
So the biggest thing I like to take away is, the same aspect of one, being humble. But I think one thing that I try to tell a lot is, when you are, the further up you move in the food chain, the more you become removed from reality. And if you can always take a step out and try to go see what either your soldiers are doing or at a corporate world, like when you're a CEO or an executive, get out and go down and see what they're doing. Because, at some point we were all that person, like, I got a great idea if somebody would listen to me. And, I just remember when I was in the old guard, like I didn't stand in, I'd never done a funeral. I'd never ridden a horse. I never, stood in a cordon, never marched in an escort. So I went down and I did it, right? I mean, I was scared shitless, Mark, because I was like, if I screw this up, right, this is going to be bad. But by being down there with them, with the boys, I could learn things, right? And, there was a specific soldier that changed how we did funerals because he kind of took the idea, but I was there with him. And when you see those things, when you're in that position, you can really go out and make a difference. And I think you just got to be humble and you got to listen. I think humility. I mean, I've always, I don't know, for me, it was always hard to stand up in front and talk to whatever formation, because I never thought, sometimes I was in more in all of them, right? More in all of these guys, closing with and destroying or being on the front line.
Right.
So it was like, sometimes it was like, I don't know if I've earned the right or if I deserve the right to stand to stand in front of you. And I think just being authentic, right? I think you go out and you be who you are. Don't try to be something you're not. Just be who you are. Be authentic, and I think people will appreciate. If you show who you are, people will be appreciative of it.
Absolutely. Great final words, man. Listen, 24 plus years of a long, distinguished military career, and more combat than people want to shake a stick at. That's for darn sure. But I always tell people sometimes you make a bigger impact in the post-military career than you do during your military career. Now, I know it's hard to top what you accomplished in the Ranger Regiment and at JSOC and everything beyond, and especially in the old guard, because when you started speaking about that, the passion in your voice really comes through. It's one of those things where I can sense the amount of pride you took in that job, and anytime you have a direct impact on any life, that's something important that stays with you, and I think that's something to be cherished, and it's very unique because not everybody recognizes those moments, and you did, and I think that's very astute of you, and you're very aware of it. So. Again, congratulations on all your success, and certainly I continued success with LDR Leadership. And again, ldrleadership.com is where you guys can go. Some final thoughts here, Dave, for you. You look back on 24 years, anything you would do different?
That's one of those questions. Do you do something different, or is what you did a product of who you are now, right? And do you make those same... Am I who I am now if I didn't experience all those things? I mean, sure, there are things I wish I knew now that I could go back and do. I think the biggest thing that always stuck with me is I never wanted to let the soldiers or Rangers down. I just wanted to bring them home and try to do right by them. And I think that's one of those, as a leader, you are far less in the kinetic action than they are. And so all you can do is control as much to give them the resources and tools. And, for me, it's always, I just hope, I hope I did them well is really one of those things that, it's kind of one of those, you love them like kids, right? Like you love them like kids. And
yeah,
I don't know if I'd change anything, maybe do some things differently, but enjoyed it. It was a great profession, right? The profession of arms and the Brotherhood of Arms is an amazing profession with an amazing mission.
Certainly is. And I'm glad you're navigating retirement well, because I keep telling people, I've been in uniform more of my life than I've been out of it. When you think about it, right? And so I don't know life without putting on a uniform at some point in time. It's a little scary and a little daunting to think of a day where I don't have to put that uniform on at any point in time. So I'll call you when it's time for some advice otherwise.
Yeah, it's a lot of up and downs, right? Some days, Mark, it was 5 years ago, 2 days ago that I actually hung up the uniform, August 1st.
Wow.
5 years. It's hard to believe. It goes by quick, just as quick.
Well, that's because you have kids, right? Everything with kids goes by quick because it's not your life. Your pain goes by slow. Their joy goes by quick. There's a big difference.
Yeah, well, they're both in college now, so now it's on like another transition.
Right,
what
exactly.
do I do with an empty nest in life, right?
Yeah. Well, listen, and you guys can find Dave on LinkedIn if you want to hook up with him for other services with LDR Leadership as well. Listen, I appreciate your candor and your honesty, and certainly sharing your story with us. It's been fantastic talking to you. Continued success with LDR Leadership and in your personal life, and we certainly wish you the best, brother.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate what you're doing, man.
Dave Taylor, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
You've been listening to Kill Cliff's Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at producer@hazardground.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.